Media Narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:10 p.m. in a very grim, dark, gray, miserable, cold, unlivable, unlikable Central Europe. Winter is now getting really icy here. Snow and the days, which are supposedly getting longer, are not really don't really appear to be anything other than the kind of a little bit of daylight that you get between um, night and night. Anyway, on a happier note, thank you everybody who has joined me, and this is our first um, live stream of the new year. So happy New Year, everybody! Very glad to celebrate, so to speak, the new year with you. So obviously, the big news, these seemingly these two terrorist events in the United States. So we have the one in New Orleans, and then of course we have the one in Las Vegas. Now, there are obviously a number of peculiarities about this, not least of which was the in New Orleans when we started off with this bizarre spectacle of the New Orleans police chief appearing on the scene. Who looked like everybody's granny, and she was speaking in this very peculiar, halting way, as if she was delivering a political speech. So she would utter sort of a few words for emphasis, and then she'd have a pause, and then a few more words for emphasis, pause. It's not clear why she was speaking like that. I mean, she's just supposed to be providing briefings. Um, and then we had when the granny made way. She's only 65, but she looked something like 20 years older than 65. Didn't at all inspire any kind of confidence in the New Orleans Police Department. And then she um, made way for the FBI special agent, the one with the nose ring, who announced that this was not a terrorist event, which was very, very strange. Because leave aside the fact that they had already found a black ISIS flag, and we'll come to that in a bit, a black ISIS flag, um, and then what he had done was ramming his car into a crowd, and then shooting it out with the police. All of that had the hallmarks of a terrorist attack. But even if you're not going to say that, at the very least, if you're an investigator, you would say, well, we're still looking into it. We don't want to rule anything in, and we don't want to rule anything out. But to state that this is not a terrorist event, and then she started talking about IEDs. What it is an event with involving IEDs, and we have to establish whether they were viable or not. What the hell? What the hell is a viable IED? Is that the issue? Whether they're viable? I mean, it was a most absurd announcement when everybody in the world knew this was obviously a terrorist event. So this was the FBI special agent. This wasn't just some a cop on the street who doesn't know anything. So she makes this announcement. Now the FBI have confirmed that this is indeed a terrorist event. I don't even know why they use this bizarre locution of an event, like I'm an event planner. My job is an event planner. So you just rather say it's a terrorist attack. So they had that, and And then we have the sort of the peculiarity of the case in Nevada, or Las Vegas, Nevada, where this Tesla Cybertruck, in which there was apparently a green beret was in this with explosives in this Cybertruck in the driveway of one of the Trump hotels, um, and evidently he shot himself and blew himself up. I mean, there's a lot of very strange aspects to it because, of course, the that this person who in Vegas was, as I say, he was a Green Beret, and he'd been a Green Beret for many years. I mean, this is he's a long time veteran in the U.S. Army, so therefore he was highly experienced in combat, highly experienced in the use of explosives, and this was a rinky-dink explosives that he had in his car. I mean, it's like somebody who doesn't know anything about explosives. Whoa, how do I blow something up? Let me look it up on Google, and then which is what it sounded like. It didn't sound like what a professional military person would do if he wanted to cause a huge explosion. I mean, if that was his goal, to cause a huge explosion, you would have thought a 20-year veteran of the U.S. military, a Green Beret, would know what to do. And he didn't. Now, the the talk about him so far is that he's a Trump supporter. Of course, he is. He's a Trump supporter, but he's also apparently a big Ukraine fan. So he was, on his Facebook page, he has a photograph of himself, with wearing a Ukraine T-shirt, Slava Ukraina, kind of, reviving the Bandera slogan of Ukraine. But nonetheless, it is very peculiar because if his goal was to cause a terrorist attack, then he would have done a much better job of it. He would have known how to use explosives. And then, of course, putting it in a cyber truck really was a very bad idea because he didn't actually do anything. I mean, the cyber trucks are actually pretty solid, pretty heavy, and they were able to contain the explosion. You want to, if you're going to do it again, you want a much smaller, lighter vehicle that would, boom, the whole thing would explode and damage all the buildings, windows, everything around it. Well, this didn't do that. As far as we can tell, there's no connection between the Vegas guy and the New Orleans guy, other than they both spent many years in the military, and they'd both been stationed in Afghanistan, and they had even spent time at a base in North Carolina, though I don't think they were there at the same time at this army base in North Carolina. Now, in the case of New Orleans, so he killed 14 people. The 15th is himself. So he kills 14 people, and they're saying, oh, he was inspired by ISIS, which is again very, very strange because there's nothing in his background that would suggest any particular interest or affiliation with ISIS. As I say, he spent time in the military. He had actually had, quite a decent resume. He'd worked at some big firms, big accountancy firms, Deloitte, and that's where he was working now. So he had a job. Now they say that he'd run into all sorts of financial problems. He'd had two wives, and I think his last divorce had given him financial problems, and that he was on the brink of losing his home, which may all be the case. But they disclosed that he was making quite good money at Deloitte. He was making something like 125,000 a year, which is a very, very nice salary. So it wasn't clear to me from what I've read. Maybe somebody here can enlighten me, um, why he was in such dire financial straits. I mean, he's got a good job. He hasn't lost his job. Um, as I say, he was making something like 125,000 a year. Whatever payment he owed his wife and his and children, um, it shouldn't have caused him that much distress. And anyway, what has that got to do with ISIS? Um, Now, the other thing is, of course, that you have to wonder whether is ISIS a thing. I mean, it's like I've forgotten about ISIS. Well, so to speak, I've forgotten about ISIS. It's like it's something that you remember back in the day. Was it 2015, 2016, when we had all these terrorist attacks? We had the attacks in Paris. We had attacks in Nice. Then we had San Bernardino in California, and then of course we had the attack in Florida, the nightclub, um, and all of those were said to be inspired by ISIS. But they were all around that time, 2015, 2016. Um, and I have no idea whether, I mean, I can't remember whether they use that word inspired by, or rather, or instigated by, or ISIS gave orders. And it was always very bizarre, because what is the point of this? I mean, you know uh, if you're going to commit terrorism, then you have to at least have some sense of going from one thing to another, what you're hoping to achieve. I mean, you're throwing your life away. I mean, that's a given. You're also killing a whole bunch of innocent people, with a view to what are you hoping to accomplish thereby? How is that in any way achieving ISIS goals? Now, of course, I'm very skeptical that there is such a thing as ISIS. I think that was that I think is a creation of the CIA, because again, what's the program? What's the agenda? And then how are you going to get there? Now, killing a whole bunch of innocent people in the United States, you're not going to achieve anything that way. Um, so that I mean, if one thinks of the biggest Al Qaeda terrorist attack in the United States, obviously the 9/11 attacks. Well, what did that accomplish for Al Qaeda? I mean, it sent the United States into Afghanistan. It sent them into Iraq. Um, but what does ISIS get at? Well, in that case, what did ISIS is a later creation from? How are you in any way furthering your cause? Now, if Al Qaeda, which wants to build supposedly, or ISIS, when they want to build their caliphate, well, the only people who can do it, get it done for you, um, are the Americans. Only the Americans can do it for you, and of course, the Americans are very happy to oblige. So while ISIS or Al Qaeda or Jabhat al-Nusra, or whatever their iterations, when they're going after, whether it's Bashar al-Assad, or whether they're going after Gaddafi, then they are, working hand in glove with the United States. And that's why it's always been obvious that that these kind of Islamic terrorist organizations are working with the United States. But I mean, killing Americans on American soil, that isn't going to get you anywhere. Attacking Bashar al-Assad, whom the United States detests and has long detested, because he was a secular leader, he wasn't, an Islamist. The Baathists did have some socialist pretensions, at least back in the earlier days. And of course, they were very friendly. Particularly Syria was very friendly with first the Soviet Union, then Russia. Provided Russia with ports and bases, and of course, Syria was very friendly with Iran. So there was a reason why the United States hated the Assads, father and son, and wanted to get rid of them. And of course, also they were, among the strongest opponents of Israel in the Middle East. So that's again, American and Israeli interests are in tandem. But there's nothing in ISIS that particularly offends the Americans. As long as Arabs or whoever are in the business of building caliphates, stoning women for adultery, wrapping women up in burqas and all that. I mean, Americans don't care about any of that. Absolutely couldn't care less. Americans pretend they do. Well, we believe in women's education, women's rights, or whatever. Americans don't care about that. I mean, it was clear when they intervened in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union back in the 80s, that obviously they were taking the side of the most backward, most retrograde people in Afghanistan against the much more progressive and advanced faction that was backed by the Soviets. So if really what you were thinking about was women's rights, education for women, then of course you'd be not supporting these jihadis. So the whole thing with ISIS makes no sense. And particularly this guy who has spent all these years in the U.S. military, and so they say, "Oh yeah, I'm with ISIS." And they say, "What is ISIS? What the hell is that? What is it? You want to create a caliphate? Is that it? Where is this caliphate going to happen? Is it going to happen here in the United States? Is it going to be in the Middle East? Well, if it's in the Middle East, you want to build a caliphate, then go to the Middle East and help build a caliphate. But I mean, how does killing a whole bunch of people having a good time in New Orleans advance your goal of building a caliphate? So it doesn't really make a great deal of sense any more than this Green Beret. And even if he is so strongly in favor of Ukraine, and so he posed with a T-shirt, saying "Slava Ukraina" on the T-shirt. Why? How does kind of blowing yourself up? I mean, in front of Trump Hotel, going to help you achieve Ukraine's goals. So I find both cases very strange. I mean, they don't really make a great deal of sense. But then I never really thought that those any of the ISIS terrorist events really made a great deal of sense, and they accomplished nothing. What I think it was interesting is that the United States has gone on perfectly happily supporting ISIS in the Middle East, even as it uses the threat from ISIS as the justification for its ongoing military presence in the Middle East. So, happily, the media never ask, what exactly is the United States doing in Syria and in other places, Somalia, West Africa? You have a military presence everywhere, and then no one else. Well, how do you just sort of get to be in all these different places and doing what exactly? Um, well, the answer comes back. Well, we're fighting ISIS. You know, we got to fight ISIS, and we don't. No, it it's not clear how you in any way um, fighting ISIS. What exactly do you do every day that you actually fight ISIS? You know, when was the last time you actually fought ISIS? You know, we don't really know. Other than it's a justification. It's a very uh, cute justification for maintaining an American military presence. So now, and we're getting these stories in the U.S. media about, well, the United States is very concerned about the rise of ISIS in the chaos of Syria. Well, that's very interesting because the United States has been in Syria since 2014, so that's 10 years in Syria. Without obviously United Nations sanction, without obviously an invitation from the government in Damascus to be in Syria. But so what they've been doing is fighting ISIS. And now the United States turns around and says, whoa, things aren't looking good. Um, ISIS is on the march. So what have you been doing all this time? Um, anyway, to get back to these terrorist events, I don't know yet um, what to make of this. Now, of course, there'll be the people who will present. Oh yeah, it's a false flag. Everyone always says all these terrorist attacks are false flag. I mean, it's now de rigueur. It's always a false flag. Um, and and I, I don't know. I mean, I haven't. I don't quite know what would be the rationale for the false flag if you say, oh well, it's ISIS, but the Americans are already fighting ISIS, or I want to put some quotes around it, fighting, quote, fighting, unquote, ISIS. So there's already no particular reason for any additional terrorist events in the United States, because we know that Trump will expand the American mission in Syria. He's obviously going to do that. He's not going to allow Israel and Turkey to carve up Syria among themselves. I mean, that's not the way the Americans operate. So now that Bashar al-Assad is gone and it's a free for all, they're going to basically dismember the state. Then the Americans are going to be a part of that. And the Americans obviously want to use Syria as a forward base, as a kind of launching pad for their military interventions in the Middle East and in North Africa. I mean, the Americans aren't just going to walk away from that. The Russians have gone, and the port and the bases are obviously up for grabs, and the Americans are going to take them. And that's obvious. I mean, there's really no reason for an ISIS attack to get the Americans in. So yeah. So I'm a little skeptical of the false flag theory. But as I say, that's not to deny that there are obviously very strange aspects to both cases. How does somebody as sort of a 20-year army veteran, a Green Beret of all things, so it's a real, he's a really experienced, tough guy, who knows one or two things about special military operations, and therefore knows one or two things about explosives. How does he put together something so amateurish and so ridiculous? And he was quite again, very well decorated army person. And the same thing with with the guy in New Orleans who said, "Oh, he's inspired by ISIS." But when did this come about? Does anyone can anyone pinpoint a time when he suddenly started talking about jihadism? He suddenly started talking about caliphates. Said, "Yeah, we got to put women in burqas, and we need a lot more Sharia law in this country rather than the U.S. Constitution." So I don't know. Um, and then again, when we're talking about this, the personal problems, they say, "Oh yeah, these financial problems and so on." I don't see where they happen. I mean, if he'd lost the job, he'd lost his quite nice job. Um, and he was on the brink of losing his house and so on. Okay, well, those are serious problems, and somebody could flip as a consequence of that. But he had a job. I mean, he wasn't in any danger. There's no evidence that he was in any danger of losing his job. Um, and as I say, he had quite a solid resume. He spent all these years in the army. Um, and then he worked at these prestigious firms, prestigious accounting firms. So what's the reason? And making good money, 125 grand a year. So what's the reason why is he suddenly gone crazy? Um, and that's the strange aspect to all of this. But anyway, let's take a look at some of the comments, see if people are a little more um, au fait with what's going on than I am, because at the moment, while we still have strange, these strange stories, this is not a terrorist event, says the FBI agent who pushes aside Granny, and he says, "Yeah, we're with the FBI agent with the nose ring." You'd have to think, though, that Christopher Wray really was an absolute joke of a director. I mean, these are the people who were promoted within the FBI. We had all these years. First of all, we had that clown Mahler as director of the FBI. Then, of course, we had Comey, and then we had Christopher Wray. I mean, what an organization with these people in charge. Anyway, so Stone River, thank you very much, Stone River. Really appreciate your generosity. Good to see you. Happy New Year. And Stone River indeed says, "Happy New Year, George and all Gagglers. What role do you expect J.D. Vance to play in the Trump administration? Becoming president, of course, is one possibility." Well, that's a very interesting point, what you just said. Becoming president, of course, is one possibility. Now, Trump obviously seems to be quite a healthy individual. I mean, he looks very energetic. It doesn't seem like he rests or sleeps very much, so he's obviously quite quite strong and fit for a man of his age. But he is 78, and and as it comes, as it happens to all men, um, people check out, once they pass a certain point in life. So that is obviously something to consider. I mean, I really do think that yeah, he may be energetic now, but boom, things can happen very dramatically, and we don't know that much about Trump's real medical condition. I mean, he's kept quiet about it. He hasn't really disclosed very much, and he doesn't have to say much, but he has kept his medical condition uh, quite secret. So we don't know whether he has any kind of a heart condition or whatever. But there's no question that there's definitely one real option is Vance will take over as president. And that, of course, will be interesting because, as I think we've discussed many times here at the Gaggle, we're a little bit skeptical whether Trump is really going to bring this war in Ukraine to an end. And probably we'll talk about that a little bit later in this live stream. But I do think that Vance doesn't believe in this war, and Vance, I think, would be much more determined than Trump is likely to be in trying to bring this thing to an end. I think Vance is much more. I mean, given his background, he's much more aware that vital resources are being taken out of the United States, where they could be used to help many poor people, the poor people that Vance grew up amongst, that these resources are being channeled to Ukraine, and so I think he I think would be very very strongly inclined, I think, to bring that to an end. I mean, just for that reason, not because America can't afford it, but because why should resources that can be used for Americans be used, to line the pockets of Ukrainian crooks? I don't think Trump really thinks that strongly about that. I mean, I think he played along with it, but I don't think he necessarily thinks that strongly about that. He'd have done more if he had. He'd have done more to end the conflict and to bring the parties together during the time that he was president. Remember, I mean, after all, the war was already taking place. I mean, obviously not at the level after 2022, but there was a serious conflict going on in the Donbass. And if you were serious about trying to build a rapprochement with Russia, I think he'd have done a lot more at that time to ensure that Minsk was adhered to. Because again, the Russians repeated over and over and over again that that this Minsk accords are being ignored. So I think Vance would be more inclined. But as for the rest, I tend to think his job will be, in the way, the jobs often are in vice presidents. He's going to go making speeches to the MAGA base and rallying the MAGA base behind Trump. I think that's what he will do. I don't see that he's going to have any executive role. At the moment, I don't see that he's going to be given any executive role. I mean, Trump has appointed a number of people in, quite strong-headed people in a number of departments and agencies who will pursue their agenda. So I don't know where Vance would really come into it. It's not like when Biden said, "Oh, I think I'm going to appoint my vice president as border czar." Trump already has a border czar. He already has appointed various emissaries to the Middle East, emissaries on Russia, emissaries to Israel, and so on. So he doesn't really need anyone else to take care of these things. But I think Vance, I think he's a very effective debater. He's a very effective public speaker. He's generally kind of an engaging person. So you play to his strengths. You put him on television for the Sunday talk shows. He's always going to give a good account of himself and of the administration. And then you have him speak at rallies, so that when Trump supporters express their displeasure at something or other, Vance will be there to reassure them. It sort of kind of reminds me a little bit of the role that, say, Spiro Agnew played for Nixon. I mean, Spiro Agnew just he kind of rallied the troops and said all the sorts of things that he, as vice president, is allowed to say, but which Nixon, as president, really couldn't say. So and and then he he had these really great speech writers working for him. Obviously, Pat Buchanan, and of course William Safire, and Safire, of course, he came up with all his famous alliterations like the nattering nabobs of negativism, and suddenly Spiro Agnew, who had, but I mean, he's very obviously a very different figure from Vance, but before that, no one really thought very highly of Agnew. He wasn't thought of as being that bright, but suddenly he became a national figure because he was delivering these really pointed attacks on liberals and liberal icons. So I think I think something like that. But I mean, obviously Vance is much more intellectual than Agnew was. Now, you know, what is interesting is well, what happens once we reach the midpoint of the administration? So then 2024. So right. So in 2027, January 2027, everyone's going to be preparing for their run in 2028. And a number of the people within the administration will be thinking about running in 2028. And so they're going to be positioning themselves in some way to oppose other members of the administration. So if you think about Marco Rubio, I think he's obviously going to be running in 2028. Vance obviously will be running in 2028. Um, and well, obviously you have the figures in the Senate. Um, all the various Josh Hawley, and who will be preparing for 2028. Rand Paul maybe as well. Um, and and that really will be quite um, quite interesting. I would have thought Rubio will probably leave sometime after the midterms. There'll be enough disagreements between him and Trump to make say, well, I feel my usefulness to President Trump is coming to an end. I wish my successor all the best, and I think he will leave and prepare his run in 2028. Vance, I imagine, will just stick by until he'll start. I mean, much like other vice presidents, they begin their campaign while they're serving in the administration. So yeah, I mean, I think that he Vance will definitely be preparing for his run in 2028, and I mean, it's going to be a crowded field, and so he'll obviously have a head start. But my feeling is that he's not going to have any executive role in the administration. I think he's going to be very useful on the Sunday talk shows because he really is very good at that. He's a very good debater. He's very smooth. He never loses his temper. And he's very articulate. So I think that's his usefulness. I don't think he's going to be given any executive functions. Anyway, Ivan Grozny. Good evening, George. Good evening. Happy New Year. I hope you had a happy New Year. Thank you very much. I'm curious what you think about Fitzo threatening to shut off electricity to Ukraine, whether Hungary will follow suit, and whether Ukraine with less electricity will have any effect on the Ukrainian government's decision making. Yeah, my own feeling is that it won't have much of an effect, and I don't know whether Fitzo will carry this out. I mean, these threats come without any great conviction. He said, "Yeah, well, that's one of the things that we'll be looking at." I don't think Ukraine will be left without electricity. I mean, the Ukraine's purchasing electricity from all sorts of different sources. I think he can get it from Poland. I think he's going to, get it. Probably get some from Germany. I think that it won't have that much of an effect. Hungary is actually doing quite well because Hungary is getting its gas through Turk Stream. So that's the one gas pipeline that is still running from Russia. So Hungary is okay, like as is Serbia and Bulgaria. I don't know whether Hungary is selling electricity to Ukraine, so I don't know whether they can withhold it. My own feeling is that there's no shortage of electricity, and Ukraine gets pretty much everything for free. Ukraine doesn't really pay for anything, so I don't think that'll be um, much of a problem. Um, Slovakia will presumably have to find other sources for its gas. I mean, presumably it can make use of the Turk Stream. I mean, probably the Hungarians will help Slovakia out. I imagine also there's also the sources liquefied natural gas. They can uh, make additional purchases of liquefied natural gas from Russia, um, from Croatia, from Poland. But I mean, obviously, it's going to be much more expensive. I mean, it is going to hit Slovakia, so they're going to have to make adjustments. But I think that's how they'll get it. It's a I think that I mean, it was really a way for Ukraine to hit back at Slovakia. I mean, it's not obviously it's not going to make a huge amount of difference to Russia. Russia has other uh, customers for its gas. Um, as I said before, I don't understand why Russia hasn't done what the EU has been accusing it of. Why hasn't Russia cut off all energy to Europe? It's kind of strange that it's the European the customers who are cutting themselves off. So no, we're not going to purchase any more from Russia. Um, and Ukraine does this. So it should be Russia who say, look, we're not going to provide you with any more energy because you are using this energy to run your factories to produce weapons that are going to be used against us, that are going to be used to kill Russians. I mean, that's the obvious thing. We're not going to basically subsidize your economies. We're not going to subsidize your factories because you are combatants against us. You're basically producing weapons, shells that are going to be used against us. They're killing us. And so, that it's what would make sense. That is the producer, the one who sells the goods, who says, "That's it. I'm not selling you anything. You can freeze for all I care." I mean, that's what the Arabs did in the famous Arab oil embargo in 1973. I mean, didn't really achieve very much. I mean, other than raise oil prices, but at least the oil embargo made some sense because they objected to the Western countries' support for Israel. But it's the actual producers, who withheld the oil. Of course, it jacked up prices very nicely for them, and then of course the oil was of course and there was never any real threat that the Western country wouldn't get any oil, but and then this oil money went back into the Western economies, the petrodollars, and a lot of people made a lot of money thereby. But at least you can see how that would work. But the Russians haven't done this. And so it's very peculiar that it's those who are the beneficiaries of cheap energy who are saying, no, we're not gonna take this. We're not going to accept it. It's it's violates our principles. We want to go on killing Russians, but it violates our moral principles to go on accepting Russian cheap Russian energy. So I think that they should have the Russians should have done this long ago. But then as, there's a lot of things Russia should have done. It's kind of head scratching as to why they haven't done it. So yeah, I don't think it's going to have a huge crisis. I think Slovakia will find other routes. As I say, either liquefied natural gas or there'll be more gas available through the Turk Stream. And Hungary will probably help out there, provide some gas to Slovakia. And again, as Ukraine will buy its electricity, but buy, one uses the term loosely. I mean, Ukraine doesn't really buy anything. Ukraine doesn't pay for anything. Ukraine just gets everything gratis. So anyway, Jumpman 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hey George, when are you coming back to the States? A lot of warm, sunny states all year long here. That's a very interesting idea, because I spent most of the time when I was in the U.S., most of the time in New York, and it was extremely cold in the winter, and it was much brighter than Budapest. I mean, whatever else you say about the cold New York winters, there's a lot of sun. You do get a lot of sun, even though you often have Arctic conditions, but you do get a lot of sun. Unlike Budapest, where you don't get any sun in the winter. But I spent a year out in California, and I have to say I did enjoy that. That was it, because you didn't have the icy winters there. The winter was really mild, and you got a lot of sun. You got a lot of very, very pleasant sun, greenery all the year round, and I kind of enjoyed that. So that was nice. But there are obviously many states in the South which would be kind of it would be very pleasant. I mean, I do think that it's something I should I consider, since I find these dark, dreary winters so so miserable and so innovating that that I should think about living somewhere where I don't have to put up with this misery. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good suggestion. I have to think that through. So anyway, thank you, Jumpman. Um, and then Dr. Nostrum says they may elect their police chief. So this police chief, I read somewhere that she was fired. She was the Oakland, California police chief. She got fired there, and then she was snapped up by New Orleans. Well, we need this person. She's just been fired by Oakland. We need to grab her. And then she ran over some pedestrians recently. Apparently, she ran them over as police chief of New Orleans, and of course, that kind of reminded me of I think it was one of those Naked Gun movies where he Captain Drebin was at the at a White House state banquet, and it was the older President Bush, President George H.W. Bush, said something like, well, you have to give an accolade for Captain Drebin of Police Squad for the 1,000th drug dealer killed. And Drebin gets up and says, "Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. But in all honesty, the last two I backed over with my car." And of course, everyone is shocked. But the last two, I backed over with my car. So this police chief kind of reminded me of Captain Trevor. It's very interesting how in the UK and in the US, um, all police chiefs are either women, and preferably black women. It's a way of making sure that they don't get attacked, that they don't get a bad press. So who's our police chief? Well, here is this granny, this woman who looks 85 years old. That's our police chief. So you can't attack us. We don't have some big burly white man who's our police chief. No, we got this frail old lady who was kicked out from Oakland, runs people over, runs pedestrians over. That's our police chief. So don't attack us. But it's everywhere. I mean, it's like the police chief in New York is a woman, and that happens throughout the UK. Every time there's a talk, who's the chief constable, Lancashire or whatever. Who's the chief constable? Of course, it's a woman. Always that. It's a way of just sort of warding off any criticism. Hey, look how advanced we are. Look how progressive we are. Our police chief is a woman, and so, but again, ideally, you want to have a black woman as your police chief. Then you're safe. No one's going to come after you. And so this so we have that spectacle, as I say, is like that was jarring in itself when people suddenly saw that's your police chief. Again, people said, hey, she looks older than my granny. And then said, well, now I'm going to make way for this FBI special agent who's taking over the investigation. So this strange black woman with a nose ring comes along. Yeah, I'm the FBI special agent. And then she announces, this is not a terrorist event. Everybody already knew this was a terrorist event. This is not a terrorist event. So that was yeah, that was all quite jarring. But I think that this is now going to be the way forward, with particularly the police. This is the police, and like everything else, there's a lot of strength and physicality involved in police work. A lot of it is quite dangerous, and so on. So you think this is really the person who best represents what your police force is like. This elderly, frail woman. That's your police force. So I mean, we've all seen those, the footage of, police women making arrests, and then a suspect just sort of, SWAT knocks her out of the way, and then escapes. And you're thinking, well, yeah, probably it's not a great idea, to send a couple of women to arrest some guy 6'5", weighs about 250 pounds. Probably that isn't going to be a successful arrest. But anyway, Anne Marie, always very good to see you. Good evening and happy New Year, George and Gagglers. Welcome, Anne Marie. Happy New Year to you. Hope things are going to be a little better in in Switzerland in the coming years. So please keep us briefed about what's going on in Switzerland. And Robert says, Larry Johnson said this about the two attacks. I can't rule out the possibility that this individual was acting as part of a broader effort to create chaos and instability in the United States prior to the inauguration of Donald Trump, to prevent Trump from being inaugurated. Because Trump is seen as a potential existential threat to organizations like the FBI, the CIA, and the Department of Justice. Well, I can't rule this out. I mean, we can't rule anything out, obviously. The problem with that theory is, why would it have anything to do with Trump's inauguration. Um, you know, but tomorrow there's going to be a vote in the House for the House Speaker, um, and I don't know whether Mike Johnson will will succeed. I mean, if I were if I were put money on this, I think he will probably make it. I think the Trump endorsement um, was is I think will I think get him over the finish line, but it's not a done deal. There are obviously people who are not happy with him. I would have thought that could affect at least the certification on January the 6th, which is next Monday. That could affect it if they don't have a speaker by January the 6th. I mean, even if they work all weekend getting a speaker, we know last time it took 15 votes for House Speaker before Kevin McCarthy made it, and then he only survived a few months anyway in that job. So I think Johnson will probably make it, but again, it's possible that he won't. I think that will affect at least the certification. I don't know whether it will affect the inauguration, but I don't see that any of this kind of chaos will affect the inauguration because I mean it doesn't even affect the football match. You'd have thought, oh, at least we'll cancel the football match, but they're not even canceling the football match. They just simply rescheduled the this college football match by 24 hours. So if they can't, if it doesn't even succeed in canceling a college football match, then I don't quite see how it's going to affect the inauguration. So I don't see it. I mean, unless all sorts of other things are going to happen. But to be honest, I mean, even if you get much bigger terrorist events, I don't think that's going to affect the inauguration. I mean, even if we get into a shooting war with Russia, Biden provokes a shooting war with Russia. Even that, I'm not sure would affect the inauguration. You could still swear in the president. I mean, you can do it in a very in a in a somewhat haphazard way. Do it, in a bunker somewhere. You don't have to have a big ceremony, but I think it'll be done. I mean, they swore in Lyndon Johnson after the assassination of Kennedy. I mean, there was Jackie standing next to him. I mean, her blood-stained coat. I mean, so it was, even in those circumstances, they didn't have any problem. So I find it hard to believe that you can affect the inauguration. As I say, some kind of a fight within Congress would affect it in some ways. So, Anne Marie, thank you very much for your generosity. Always appreciate it. Thank you so much. And Dr. Nostrum says we lost George. Where did you lose him? Oh, okay. George, you can be in special forces without being an expert in you can be in special forces without being an expert in explosives. Well, I don't know. I don't know whether that's true. I would have thought that if you're in the Green Berets, you get an all-round training. And he's been there for many, many, many years. It's hard to believe that you don't have a much more solid. You don't have to be an expert in explosives, but you have to know some basics. I mean, you know how to rig up an explosive device. You know how to give yourself a big bang. Again, you may not know how to blow up the bridge on the River Kwai. That means that you need to know a lot about explosives there, but you would know enough to, hey, if I'm gonna have a rig up a car with explosives and it's gonna have an impact, kill a lot of people, at least break the windows of the Trump Hotel. I mean, he didn't even achieve that. So what he had was a very rudimentary explosive device. Now, I think somebody who has had army training, somebody who's been in the Green Berets, would be able to do better. Even if he can't blow up the bridge on the River Kwai, he would know how to do how to do a better job. Aristotle 1 says, should Russia just put blanket sanctions on Western economies, or is it playing a clever game, making the West damage their own economies? Is the end game the US using in the Russia connection to apply full sanctions to China? Happy New Year, by the way. Thank you very much. Well, my feeling has been that as I say, when you say sanctions, yeah, they should have absolutely cut the West off from energy. I think that would have had a devastating impact. And in any case, I mean, for the Russians to say, well, we believe in honoring our contract. We believe, we don't want to lose our reputation for for as a reliable provider of energy. Well, you've already lost that reputation, because as far as the Western media and the Western governments are concerned, they already are claiming that Russia is using energy as a weapon. It's weaponized its energy. Russia is denying energy to the West. Of course, it isn't. But Russia already has that reputation. So that line that, well, we want to maintain our reputation as a reliable source of energy. I mean, you already don't have that reputation, so you gain nothing by continuing to provide this energy. So and this goes on all the time. I mean, Putin, I don't know how many times he has said that one of those 4 pipelines that were of the Nord Stream pipelines that were sabotaged, one of the 4, is still functional, and then we can turn on the pipes as soon as Germany gives us the go-ahead. So he says this now, while Germany is sending tanks to kill Russians. Why should you want to give anything to the Germans? Why should why would you want to have their factories produce more tanks, more arms, more weapons, more shells? And at a nice subsidized price. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So absolutely, they should have applied the sanctions, and particularly given that its assets were stolen. $300 billion, 300 billion euros in assets has been stolen, and it's been clear, really from the start, that Russia's not getting any of that back. So even though, in other words, even if there's some kind of a settlement, under Trump or whenever, even then, even in those circumstances, those frozen assets are not going to be returned to Russia. They're going to be used for the called a reconstruction of Ukraine. So that's 300 billion euros lost. And you have to also keep in mind that that 300 billion euros is actually Russian taxpayer money. So it's not like, oh well, it's somebody's private money. This isn't private money. This is Russian. This money belongs to Russian people. That's gone. And so the Western countries have taken this. I don't, now they're using this money to subsidize Ukraine. This money is being transferred to Ukraine. So these Western countries are using Russian money to help Ukraine kill Russians. Why would you want to have any dealings with them? Why would you want to have any kind of business with them? Why would you want to provide them with anything, with any kind of energy? And yet, we get something else from the Russian leaders. Now, um, the if you know the if your goal is to bring the European economies to their knees, which I think is a very perfectly honourable and noble goal, given everything the Europeans have done, with the expanding NATO and stealing your assets, supporting Ukraine, arming Ukraine. If your goal is to bring their economies to their knees, then why don't you do it? And use your economic strength to do that. But again, it hasn't done so. And again, every day Russians are getting killed, and killed in considerable numbers in the war in Ukraine. And all that killing is being facilitated by Western economic power. So why would you want to do anything to help build and strengthen the Western economies? Cynthia, always very good to see you, Cynthia. Thank you so much. And I hope, Cynthia, you saw the movie poll for the cinema and court martials, and I hope you voted. And so we're going to have uh, a couple of films about court martials in during the next 2 Mondays. At the moment, Breaker Morant has taken the lead. That doesn't mean that it's a done deal, but Breaker Morant about the Boer War is in the lead. I thought that it might win, but at the moment I'm a little surprised that it's not being more seriously challenged by some of the other films. I thought Judgment at Nuremberg would be doing better, but there's still plenty of time, so there's lots of time to vote. Please vote, everybody. Anybody. So uh, my advice: anybody who's watching this through YouTube or Rumble, please join our locals group. Again, ideally, you will pay a subscription, but you get to watch a movie, kind of a good movie. You get to enjoy Cynthia's running commentary on the movie, and Cynthia's very detailed background knowledge and information about the movies. You get to enjoy that, and of course, you get to enjoy the movies themselves. So do please join our locals board. Anyway, Cynthia goes says, was that what you see below, which took place on New Year's Eve, George? A triple warning shot from God Almighty Himself, telling Americans to back off from executing such sadistic acts of aggression and oppression around the world. It'll face a slow and painful execution in the electric chair. Um, Free energy, weather modification. Oh, so the weather modification. Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I find it very interesting that the people always dismiss this all the talk about the weather modification, even though people can say, "Oh, man-made climate change. Oh, man-made climate. Oh, we humans, our activity is altering the climate. Oh, amazing. When you think of the sheer size of the planet, and how human activity can possibly alter the climate. But when somebody says, "I think that our governments are engaged in weather modification," oh, conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory, but why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't absolutely, for all sorts of reasons. You can think of any number of reasons why governments uh, would want to modify weather. So yeah. So anyway, yeah, I think absolutely. Anyway, Cynthia says rejecting pipeline gas in favor of LNG is exactly like running water in your home in favor of buying massive truckloads of 1 liter size cases of Perrier, way to drink, cook, and bathe with every day. That said, I'm thoroughly enjoying your show tonight, as I always do, George, and I hope New Year will bring some brightness into your rather dark way of thinking, or will take an act of God to will take an act of God to do that. And I think an act of God is probably the most likely um, triggering cause for something like that. But I agree with your point, Cynthia, which says rejecting pipeline gas in favor of LNG is exactly like, hey, we don't have running water, but we'll have deliveries of bottled water, and we'll have to keep getting it, every day or every 4 or 5 days, and then use that bottled water, to run your bath, to cook, and everything else. I agree. I don't think it's at all a satisfactory um, solution. But it was the Europeans who made that choice. They, having invested, I mean, Russia invested, Germany invested a lot of money into building those gas pipelines. But then Sergeant Schultz then said, "Well, that's it. We're not going to take any more of this gas." So they're the ones who made this call, which means that you don't have the alternative. And again, but before that, they'd already said no to coal. They said no to oil. Then yeah, you now have liquefied natural gas. You have to build the terminals and so on. Very expensive. And but nonetheless, they're the ones who made the decision. It wasn't Russia who said, "Hey, well, no, no gas for you." As I said, that's what I would have done, if I were the Russian leader. So, um, yeah, I mean, given that this is definitely the source of, um, European, European economic strength, having getting cheap energy from Russia. Yeah, this is very nice from the Americans. This is a godsend for the Americans. This is exactly what they wanted, which was to break the nexus between particularly German industry and Russian energy, and the Americans have succeeded. Anyway, Aristotle 1 says, looks like the CIA, also known as ISIS, is launching a U.S. domestic terror program for Israel and against Trump. I kind of understand that argument, but I don't see how this really works. But I mean, if one thinks about let's say you're Israel. Well, let's say you're CIA, and what would be your agenda um, for the incoming Trump administration? Well, obviously, you're hoping Trump will go to war against Iran and unleash holy hell against Iran. It's not going to be a direct invasion of Iran. Obviously, that's a huge operation, but to make life as difficult as possible for the Iranian leaders. Triggering all sorts of internal dissent. Whipping up all kinds of separatist, irredentist movements inside Iran. Use all sorts of cutouts like the National Endowment for Democracy and so on to stir up Iranians, demanding kind of liberal reforms in Tehran. I mean, that's what you would want them to do. And then, of course, at some point, you're going to start bombing Iran in the name of fighting ISIS. I mean, I always assumed that would be the goal. Now, if you have these sort of, let's say you have ISIS, these ISIS terrorist acts, how do you go from here to targeting Iran? Because there doesn't seem to be any particular Iranian connection to either of these two terrorists. They were both in Afghanistan, and they're both in the U.S. military. And again, ISIS, which they adhere to, is is not really something. That's not, whatever it is. Again, I don't really believe anything like ISIS really exists. But nonetheless, to the extent that it does exist, it's um, it's clearly part of the Sunni Muslim fanaticism. I mean, it derives from this Wahhabi extremism sponsored by Saudi Arabia. That's the origin of Al Qaeda. That's the origins of all of these jihadi terrorist movements. They don't really have anything to do with Iran. So so it would be hard to see how you can go from this to going after Iran. I, you know, is Israel already has all kinds of uh, you know people in place to persuade Trump to wage some kind of a war, hybrid war against Iran, and I'm sure Israel is already doing that. I don't know whether this will do much either way for Trump. Um, Now, admittedly, if one thinks of 9/11, um, how that was manipulated, because again, 9/11, the guilty party was, at least as far as the American government immediately said, "Oh, this was Osama bin Laden." Right away, they said that it was Osama bin Laden was behind this, and uh, and then, but for some reason, the United States attacked Iraq, which had absolutely nothing to do with Osama bin Laden. And in fact, again, Iraq really had very little time for this kind of jihadi terrorism. But that took a little bit of manipulation, and it's possible it took, well, it took about 18 months to get Americans to stop thinking about Al Qaeda and Bin Laden, and to start thinking about Saddam Hussein. I mean, that took a lot of manipulation, and that, and it's not impossible that something like that um, could be done in the case of Iran. But I think it's going to be a hard sell at the moment, because it's hard to see any kind of connection between ISIS and Iran, and Iran has been consistently fighting against ISIS. Now, yeah, the propagandists will tell us that, oh, but in reality, Iran is subsidizing ISIS, and they might make that case. Um, but I think if it comes to Iran, I think the most likely scenario in the immediate future will be to weaken Iran. I think it's going to be hard to say that somehow that either of these two terrorists had any links to Iran. But again, as I say, I think it's quite likely that Trump will target Iran. I mean, I think like given the strong Zionist contingent within the Trump team, uh, and Trump's frustration that he didn't really get what he wanted from Iran during his first term would lead me to think he will go after Iran. But we don't need these incidents to get Trump to do that. I think there's already plenty of evidence that that's the way Trump's going to go. Um, anyway, thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity, Aristotle. Marty, always good to see you. Thank you so much, Marty. Thank you as always for your all your very very entertaining postings. So thank you so much. Happy New Year, Marty. Looking forward to uh, seeing a lot more of you in the coming year. Anyway, Cynthia, where are we? Yeah, yes, yeah. Let me go back. Where was Um, hmm, let me. Have I? Let's see what I've done here. Have I missed something? I must have missed something. Um, so did I miss? Okay, I missed some of the comments earlier, so let me go back. Um, um, so Dr. Nostrand says Dr. Nostrand. I think Dr. Nostrand. I mean, I assume you took that name from. I think it was in Seinfeld. That was Dr. Nostrand was the name that Kramer was always giving himself when he was trying to pretend to be somebody other than himself. He was Dr. Nostrand. Anyway, Dr. Nostrand says, I suspect that the U.S. invented ISIS back in the run up to Gulf War II to explain the absence of weapons of mass destructions in Iraq. Well, I think it's part of an ongoing thing. I mean, it goes back to the Americans who made use of these Islamists. They did that in the Balkans. They made absolutely use of these horrible creatures. They helped bring them into Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they knew that they were horrific. I mean, they were really savage. I mean, they sliced the heads off Serbs, and then posted pictures of themselves, with their severed heads. So Americans knew all of that, but they were also lying in wait and saying, well, okay, once this is over, we will have the excuse to maintain a presence in the Balkans. We have to prevent these fanatics from taking over. So it's like, one moment they're useful allies, so much so that you actually bring them in, you import them into Bosnia and Herzegovina. And then, hey, we gotta make sure that we gotta that keep these people under control. So it's a long-standing American practice, and it's served, in one country after another. It served the Americans very well. You use them because they terrify your opponents, and then they become this bugaboo that we have to deal with, and so now, quite why the Americans decided that, like in the Balkans, that the Serbs were the enemy, or that Gaddafi was the enemy, or that Bashar al-Assad was the enemy. That's a different issue. But these creatures are entirely creations of the Americans, and they're just very, very useful for either first use them against your adversaries, and then you wage your war against terrorism to go after them, to the extent that you actually really go after them, rather than just let them do their thing. Um, okay, Marty says here, Bernard Vonnegut was an American atmospheric scientist, credited with discovering that silver iodide could be used effectively in cloud seeding to produce snow and rain. He was the older brother of American novelist Kurt Vonnegut. Huh. No, I mean, I'm absolutely convinced that weather modification is pretty straightforward. I don't believe in man-made climate change. I think that's or at least that hasn't been proven that is such a thing. But modification of weather, that's an easy one to do. Climate, that's a whole big thing, and that's what it's so unlikely that you can do something with climate. But modifying weather, absolutely, you can do it. So here's Anne Marie says, I actually don't know whether this is good news. Another example of Switzerland defending its neutrality. Let me look at this. The lettering is so small, so let me click on this. Von der Leyen. It's Ursula von der Leyen. And let me just see what she's saying. Ursula von der Leyen says this agreement between the European Union and Switzerland is historic. In this challenging environment where global power relations are constantly shifting, strong partnerships like ours are not just an advantage. And then, yeah. So I don't think it is at all a good news, but the problem is that Switzerland is really very easy um, to maneuver in any direction you want. I mean, Switzerland is very vulnerable, and although they maintain their neutrality and so on, but ultimately, once you lean on Switzerland, Switzerland caves. I remember when in the 1990s, Switzerland was suddenly targeted. Everyone would always let Switzerland go. It was a beautiful place. You went there to ski on your holidays. They made great chocolate. They made great watches. Beautiful landscape, and everyone always had nice things to say about Switzerland. And then all of a sudden, it was targeted by the Holocaust industry. They said, hey, Switzerland had got rich because of all this money that was stashed away in the Swiss banks, and this money belonged to the Jews. We want that money back. And Switzerland at first said, well, we can't really do that. We can't just simply hand things over to any Tom, Dick, and Harry who comes along and says, hey, this money belongs to me. You got to come up and with solid evidence that this money really belongs to you. But the propaganda campaign against Switzerland was suddenly quite severe. I'd never seen anything like this. And all of a sudden, Switzerland became this country of absolutely hated in the West. And suddenly this notion got about that the only reason why Switzerland is as rich as it is that they made all this money from the Jews. These Jews who were fleeing the Nazis deposited their money in the Swiss banks, and they were never able to get that money back. And Switzerland said, no, we're going to stick to it. No, we can't just simply hand money out. This money is absolutely safe in our banks. But I knew then Switzerland is going to have to cave, because once the Americans got involved, and and this was under the Clinton administration with Stu Eisenstadt, that Switzerland was going to have to cough up a lot of money. And Switzerland did. You can apply a lot of pressure against Switzerland, and of course, you never actually return money to individuals. Whenever there's money, this money goes to Israel. I mean, that's always the way it works. Just like Germany doesn't really give any money to individual Jews. They just give this money to the state of Israel. But Switzerland had to cave. There's no question. Switzerland had to cave, and it had to sign a big agreement with the Americans that is going to cough up a lot of this money, and accepted culpability, and said, hey, well, we should have been a lot more understanding and sympathetic to the claims of Jews, and so that they went back on their solemn principle of your money's safe. We don't just give it out. I'm sure, Anne-Marie, you remember this this event, and now it's gone back. No one talks about Switzerland anymore. But for a few years in the mid 1990s, Switzerland was hated almost as much as the Serbs were, and almost as much as Russia is today. But anyway, but I mean, I'd be interested in, Anne-Marie, what your memories of that time. Anyway, Cynthia says here, Matthew Leivelsberger. This is the guy who was in Vegas. Matthew Leivelsberger, who was an active duty U.S. Army Green Beret, rented a car with his ID online and didn't think he'd get caught. Yep, no, quite so. Again, hey, this guy's a Supposed to be this. Okay, he's an army trained person. These are the sort of things that you train day and night, year after year, not to make these kind of rookie mistakes. Why did he use just fireworks if he knew he'd spend the rest of his life in prison for it? Exactly. If you're going to make a statement, you make a statement. Particularly, as you say, you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. And again, why would you do that? It didn't seem like his life was all that bad. Why throw away your life? Again, just like the New Orleans person, this was a life of quite solid accomplishments. These aren't the sort of the normal kind of figures who will get caught up in these, particularly these FBI traps, these FBI domestic terrorism traps, who are often just hopeless. They have nothing in their lives. They don't have a job. They don't have any money. Don't really have too much education. So yeah, who are obviously easily susceptible, I don't know, to ISIS propaganda or FBI presenting ISIS propaganda. But these are people with accomplishments. I mean, you do army service. You not only get this training, but you get all sorts of great jobs afterwards because many companies go out of their way to hire vets. So that's kind of one of the reasons why people join the military, because it really does help your career afterwards. So, and particularly a Green Beret, which is quite prestigious. Anyway, why didn't he use a 52-foot? Why didn't he use a 52-foot truck full of ammunition, nitrate, or Semtex? Which is what Timothy McVeigh and his accomplice Terry Nichols did in Oklahoma back in 1995. And then Cynthia says, at any rate, this whole thing simply makes no sense. I couldn't agree more, and that's kind of my feeling as well. In neither case makes very much sense. It's a very, very, very strange. But I don't, at the moment, see the cui bono aspect of it. How does anyone benefit from this? I mean, maybe it'll become apparent in the coming days. But that's why the stories in neither case does it make very much sense. And anyway, Lynn says, "Happy New Year from down under." George, good to see you. We missed you. So I guess for you this is very, very nice. The nice little summer there. Marco Rubio could never be president apart from the other stuff. His ears are too big. Sorry, I thought Trump would have called him Dumbo after the flying elephant. I don't know. I always thought that what detracted from him becoming president was his extraordinarily. I mean, it's not just that he looked very young; he kind of looked like a schoolboy. I mean, it's just he just didn't really have the sort of a presidential bearing, and that's why it was always. I remember when he ran in 2016, and he would come on and say, I will be the next president of the United States. It looked like some schoolboy coming on and saying, well, I'm going to be the next president of the United States. I mean, you just couldn't take this seriously. So, but I imagine now, after all, he's now been a senator from Florida for a number of years. And he will have been Secretary of State, so he has definitely qualifications, to put his name forward. Stone River says about I need sunny weather. Yeah. George needs sun that hangs around a bit more. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I definitely need that. Anyway. Dr. Nostrum says, George, I think that Kamala Harris is a far better analog of Spiro Agnew than J.D. Vance is. I don't see it. No, no, no. I don't. Um, I don't. I mean, I Vance isn't exactly similar to Agnew because Vance has he's attended these Ivy League schools. He went to law school. He had positions in prestigious companies. Agnew didn't really have that. The only analogy that I'm drawing is that I think Vance will spend most of his time um, on the television circuit. He's going to be going on arguing with the various TV hosts, news people, and so on. And I think he'll be speaking at rallies, and telling MAGA, who are going to be very skeptical. There are going to be all sorts of things Trump is going to be doing that MAGA will be very unhappy about. I mean, we're already getting manifestations of it with this whole thing with uh, Musk and the HB1. So he's going to go there and he's going to tell them, no, 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 Trump is more determined than ever to put America first. And then, of course, they're going to be unhappy if Trump doesn't bring the American involvement in Ukraine to an end. And so he's going to be telling, whoa, yeah, but what we're doing is we shovel this off. We push this burden of Ukraine onto the Europeans. That's going to be the argument. We've managed to get the Europeans to cough up a lot more than they were coughing up before. And that'll be the justification to try to get MAGA to support Trump. So that's my only analogy between Vance and Spiro Agnew. But on the other hand, however, I don't see I don't see Kamala Harris as in any way Spiro Agnew. I mean, other than if you say Kamala Harris is not very bright, but Agnew was bright. I mean, I think the media presented him as being not especially bright. I mean, Agnew was actually a very intelligent guy. I mean, not an intellectual, but clearly a very smart guy, and was certainly. If it hadn't been for Watergate, and if it hadn't been for the criminal cases against him, was absolutely a front runner to be nominee of the GOP in 1976. And then Cynthia says, actually, it would make so much more sense for Ukraine to merely double the cost of transit, effectively tacking on a tariff to the Europeans. But Zelensky isn't the sharpest tool in the shed. Then again, Zelensky has no desire to make enough money to keep his country afloat, as long as he's got the US doing that for him. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't really, money is not really what he's primarily concerned with, because he's getting a lot of it. I mean, the Europeans are coughing up money, Americans are coughing up money. I mean, and others are coughing up. Japan, everyone else is coughing up money. So he's not, sitting there, trying to make the numbers add up. So this has never been about money for him. I mean, money personally, yeah. I'm quite sure he and the gang have salted money away. But in terms of doing right by Ukraine, but even that, it just makes me laugh. But the idea that Zelensky and the leaders of Ukraine had any notion of doing right by Ukraine. I mean, it's just if they were thinking in terms of, I think we need to increase our earnings, then they might also think, hey, I think it might be an idea if we try to minimize the losses of our human potential. It might make sense to minimize the destruction of our country. Maybe we should try and get an agreement done, and an agreement with Russia would have been perfectly reasonable for Ukraine. I mean, it's like there was nothing really very much was being asked of Ukraine other than don't join a hostile military alliance against us. We just don't like that. That's all that was required. And even, but Zelensky, he didn't want to do that. Poroshenko didn't want to do that. They'd rather sacrifice their people, sacrifice their country for this idiotic objective. Anyway, let's go back to yeah, where I was. And yeah, so Cynthia then says, my understanding is that Ukraine doesn't buy gas directly from Russia. Instead, gas merely transits Ukraine from Russia. Or Ukraine, well, Ukraine was buying gas from Russia. I mean, it was definitely buying it, but as well as transiting it. So that was it was both, and yeah, I mean that was, but and that's how Russia and Ukraine had the kind of first falling out over gas back in 2006, whereby basically Ukraine was just siphoning off its gas that was heading towards Europe. It was just basically Ukraine was helping itself to some of this gas, but also Ukraine wasn't paying its bills, and that's when Russia first started cutting back on providing Europe with Ukraine with the gas, because you basically, I mean, you got to pay. I mean, that's what Russians do, ask that you pay for your gas, and of course that was why Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 were built, because after this clash in 2006, and the fact that Ukraine was siphoning off the gas and Ukraine wasn't paying for its gas, so it was the Germans who came to the Russians and said, well, hey, why don't you build some pipelines that bypass Ukraine, and then you're not going to have a problem. You just do it, and then the gas will come straight to us under the Baltic Sea. So it was not really even the Russians' idea. It was the Germans who wanted a more reliable source of energy. But yeah, so I mean that was, but that was you got to Ukraine wasn't paying for its gas. I mean you got to kind of pay. I mean that's the minimum that was that the Russians live. Yeah. So Marty says here, Norman Finkelstein writes about the Swiss bank versus Israel lobby in his book, The Holocaust Industry. Yeah, no, that's right. He talks about that a great deal. But I remember at the time how the story was really manipulated in a way that to make the Swiss really really malevolent. Of course, it was all fairly nonsensical, because even when you add up the sums involved, it really wasn't such a huge sum of money. So the whole idea, all kinds of elderly people, coming, they're not giving us our money. I mean, you add it all up, it still doesn't come to the huge amount. That's not the reason why Switzerland got to be so wealthy. But if you keep writing about that, the New York Times was running daily stories about the horrors of Switzerland. The Switzerland's refusal to disburse money that it's ill-gotten gains. And so yeah, that was. But I mean, and it was in individuals, because let's say it was money that, let's say, German bank reserves, anything like that, any kind of bank reserves that were deposited in Switzerland, they were returned after the war. Switzerland never kept, we'll keep Germany's bank reserves. So anything like that was returned to Germany. Well, it was returned essentially to the Allied occupying powers. Um, so the whole issue of this of these the bank accounts was individual Jews um, who had deposited this money, and their relatives who were unable really to present convincing proof that they were somehow entitled to this money, and the Swiss hadn't given them so I say, well, you got to present some evidence that you are the legal the legal inheritor. Um, and so there's and that was that was the argument. But I mean, the only reason I brought this up was that if you apply enough pressure against Switzerland, Switzerland will cave. So just like on the issue of Russia, if the EU decides to apply serious pressure against Switzerland to play ball with on the issue of Russia, then Switzerland would have to do it. I mean, they don't really have much choice in it, and that's why. So in the case of the the Holocaust industry, that restitution for the victims of the Holocaust, it was a kind of bizarre. The whole idea of it was bizarre. I mean, why would why does Switzerland have to make restitution? I mean, Switzerland hadn't done anything, but they said, hey, well, you got all these apparently relatives, all kinds of relatives who were entitled to this money. They couldn't really provide any evidence that they were entitled to any of this money. So that's why, once the Clinton administration went to the Swiss and said, you better sign over an awful lot of money. I mean, obviously the Israel is going to get a big chunk, but of course we the Americans are also going to get a big chunk. But anyway, let's see if there's anything else that let's see if we can talk. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Jim Passarodka says Yulia Tymoshenko, the gas princess, became a billionaire selling subsidized Russian gas to Europe. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Okay. Anne-Marie says, I thought Switzerland was guilty. It certainly did not behave very honorably in not letting in Jewish refugees during the war. Yeah, that's true. And thus felt ashamed until recently when I read Finkelstein's Holocaust Industry, which left me quite speechless. I think so. It was clearly a shakedown operation. I mean, it was obvious at the time, this is a shakedown operation. And they're going to see how much can we squeeze out of the Swiss. And and there's you can justify it, and you can say, well, why should this little country be so rich? And they should they deserve to be brought down, a peg or two. I mean, they make all this money. All these rich people go there for their skiing holidays, and they have a nice life. They're neutral, and they just make lots and lots and lots of money. So why not shake them down for something? But it was a shakedown. I mean, there's no question. It was a shakedown, and in all the talk about the restitution, there was no restitution. The money went to Israel. That's always the case. Anyway, I think there's I can't see there's seems to be an argument about Heidegger and Nietzsche here, which I can't quite get into right now. But anyway, I think that Yeah, it's a very, I like this a very learned debate going on. I like it that the gaggle stimulates these very interesting debates. Anyway, um, my time is up. I think I think we're all in agreement that the official story that has been presented about these two terrorist events make very little sense. There's just doesn't seem to there's no rhyme or reason. It's not at all like the previous kinds of terrorist events. The ISIS thing just you know, you know it really is very passe. We've just kind of forgotten about ISIS. That's so that's so 2014. But anyway, we'll see what happens in the next in the coming days. So anyway, my time is up. Thank you, everybody who has joined me. Thank you for all of your really interesting questions and comments. Thank you, above all, to those who contributed to the tip jar, because those dogs, they're really getting very, very angry, and they're saying, "Hey, let's just hope 2025 is not going to be like 2024, because we just can't take another 2024." And I try to reason with them, but they don't. They have no respect for me, so they just don't bother reasoning with me. So thank you anyway for your contributions. Um, so let me just read this out. So Anne Marie says, there is actually a double guilt insofar as my father grew up in Leipzig during the war, and even though his family was outspoken anti-Nazi, they almost were caught by the SS. He still feels guilty about being a German. He's still quite traumatized till today. Yeah, look, I can understand a certain measure of guilt, but Switzerland really was neutral in the war, and Switzerland didn't have to be neutral. Keep in mind, I mean, there's a lot of Swiss Germans, who could easily have said, "Hey, Switzerland should support Germany." I mean, hey, we're Germans, and we should support Germany. They didn't do that, so they didn't maintain a neutrality. But I mean, look, I mean, I think that was one of the things that was held against Switzerland. Hey, well, why were you in neutral? How can you be neutral on the subject of Nazism? But the Swiss maintained neutrality. But again, as I say, they could have really done far more for Germany had they been so inclined. I mean, after all, they could say, "Hey, we're Germans," and therefore, our sympathies are obviously with Germany, but they didn't. So anyway, look, I'm not carrying water for Switzerland. I just thought that it was a shakedown, and I found that whole thing just quite nauseating. You know, watching this and the way the world media just turned against Switzerland, which it was, nothing like this had ever been seen. Always, Switzerland was a kind of beloved place. Oh, I'm going to Switzerland for my holidays. People only said nice things about Switzerland, and suddenly became this object of hatred. And then it's kind of been forgotten again. It's like once the money was obtained, once Switzerland was squeezed, and again it was the Americans who decided how much is enough, how much can we get out of the Swiss, and this was this guy Stu Eisenstadt. He was the one who decided we got to take a nice chunk out of Switzerland, something that will go down nicely. But we don't want to bankrupt Switzerland, so we'll just figure out the right sum to take. And Anna Marie says, my father was spared from fighting in the German army. Yeah, okay. Anyway, well, that was, I'm glad he was. That was good. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody who's joined me over the weekend. We're going to do a few more podcasts, and then Monday we do the live stream with Peter. And then Monday evening, at least evening my time, we have the screening. We'll see who wins the poll. Please, if you haven't voted, then vote and decide what film you want to watch. And then on Tuesday, we're going to have my next live stream. We'll hope we'll know a little more about this, the strange events of the last 2 days. Anyway, thank you. Good night. See you soon. All the best. Bye-bye.